This ground below us, is holy, holy. This air that breathes us, is holy, holy. So we're gonna hope with our hands and pray with our feet for the world that we love, for the world that we need. This bush is burning, this water's rising, our earth is hurting, our people crying. So we're gonna hope with our hands and pray with our feet for the world that we love, for the world that we need. Hope with our hands, pray with our feet for the world that we love, for the world that we need. Hope with our hands, pray with our feet for the world that we love, for the world that we need. Hope with our hands, pray with our feet for the world that we love, for the world that we need. Hope with our hands, pray with our feet for the world that we love, for the world that we need.
Mercy, mercy, may we meet this moment, this world unfinished, but never broken. And courage, courage, may we guard creation for every thousand generations.
So we're gonna hope with our hands and pray with our feet for the world that we love, for the world that we need. We're gonna hope with our hands and pray with our feet for the world that we love, for the world that we need. We're gonna hope with our hands and pray with our feet for the world that we love, for the world that we need. For the world that we love, for the world that we need.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited to see all of you here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us for the launch of the All Our Might campaign. Well, what you just heard as we were coming in is the new Jewish climate anthem called Hope with Our Hands. That is by Zoe Toby and produced in partnership with us at Dianu. If you haven't met me before, I'm Sumner Lewis. I am Dianu's national organizer for young people, which means I work with anyone who is 18 to 32 organizing Jewishly around climate action. If you haven't already, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat with your names, pronouns, location, and if you're with a group. I see that so many of you already have. I love that. And I want to say hello to Matt Liebman from Acton, Massachusetts, from Rabbi Stephanie from CVE in Brooklyn. I saw a couple of people in the chat from my home area of Western Massachusetts. I love seeing all of these so much. Hello, hello, everyone. Make sure to keep doing that. But here are just a couple of admin notes to make sure that you get the most out of tonight's program. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says closed caption. If you want to access closed captioning, you click that little button and then it will have another button that you click called show subtitle. And also a note that we're recording tonight's program and simultaneously streaming it live on Facebook. So if you want to invite some of your friends to also stream it on Facebook, there will be a link in the chat that you can send to them. We also really encourage you to have your video on tonight. I know that we're all on Zoom, and this is a great use of technology because we're all spread throughout the country. But we want to really increase the community feel. So that's why tonight we're on a Zoom meeting instead of a webinar, so you can all see each other's faces. And speaking of faces, community, being a group together, we want to get a snapshot of who's in the room. So there'll be a poll that's popping up on your screen asking about your background with Dayenu. Insert poll. Whoa, so many of you answering so fast. This is so cool to look at the numbers. We already have about 80% of people. We've surpassed 80% of people. Oh my gosh, wow. This is surprising and wonderful. Okay, so let's check out the responses together.
It's all a lie. It's all a lie. It's all
Okay,
a
so
lie.
we have the numbers. 46% of you said that this is your very first Dayenu event. So congratulations. Hi, I'm so excited to see you and meet you. 24% said that you've attended a past Dayenu event or an action. 21% said that you're already part of a Dayenu circle, and 9% of people lead a Dayenu circle. That is awesome. But for the 46% of you who are new to Dayenu, welcome. Let's tell you a little bit more about who we are. So our mission is to build a multi-generational Jewish movement that confronts the climate crisis with spiritual audacity and bold political action. But now, what do those buzzwords mean? So spiritual audacity, we're supporting people to confront the reality of the climate crisis and to grapple with the deep spiritual and existential questions it raises. And bold political action, we're advocating for a comprehensive climate policy, we're pressing candidates and elected officials to take real action, and we're working to end the era of fossil fuels and build a clean energy future. All of that builds the Jewish climate movement, which we use through mobilizing Dayenu circles across the country. And tonight, with the launch of our All Our Might campaign, all 284 of us who are currently on this call are going to learn more about that final strategy, how we can end the era of fossil fuels and build a clean energy future. However, first, we'll start by grounding ourselves in Jewish song and wisdom. You already heard Hope with Our Hands, and in a minute, Dayenu founder and CEO Rabbi Jenny Rosen will share a kavanah, or an intention, for our launch. Then we'll hear from Rabbi Rosen and author, educator, and environmentalist Bill McKibben. They'll help us understand what it means to turn the tide of the climate crisis by taking on fossil fuel companies and the financial institutions backing them. Next, we'll hear from my fellow colleague, Dayenu National Organizer Muriel McDonald, about our campaign plans. And finally, we'll close out the program with a rousing musical performance by Chava Mirel. It's going to be a great evening. I'm so happy to see you all and that you're all here. And now, it's always my pleasure to introduce Dayenu CEO and founder, Rabbi Jenny Rosen.
Thanks, Sumner. It's good to be here tonight, b'chol ma'odecha, with all our might. This phrase might be familiar to some of you from the V'ahavta, the part of the Shema, where we are called to love God with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our might. And fittingly, one of the other ways besides strength or might that the rabbis interpreted this phrase, uv'chol ma'odecha, is with all our possessions, or with all our money, which is actually an apt connection for a campaign that's focused on moving investments and financing away from polluting fossil fuels and towards building a clean energy future. But ma'od also means very, or muchness, as in with everything we've got. Since we named this campaign just a little over a week ago, I've been thinking about how doing anything with all of our might takes courage. Just facing the reality of the climate crisis, really taking it in, that takes courage. And increasingly stepping into the public square as Jews can take courage. It can feel frightening to bring everything we've got. What if we bring everything and it's not enough? What if we make mistakes? For some, just the work itself of taking bold action on climate, it can feel important, but also for some outside of their comfort zone. But we know that this crisis, this moment in human history, requires us to step fully into our power. There's simply too much at stake not to. And so we're given the opportunity to practice courage, to practice ometz lev, cultivating heart strength. And part of how we cultivate courage is by being and acting in community, all of our might together, acting with our collective power, because we have tremendous collective power. This new campaign, this is a big moment for Dayenu and for the growing Jewish climate movement. Not only because this is a multi-year campaign, not only because working to keep fossil fuels in the ground is a pillar of our work that we haven't yet fully leaned into, not only because this kind of work is largely new to much of the Jewish community. It's less familiar than legislative or electoral work. It's more complicated, it can feel complex, it requires more education and bringing people along. And it also has more potential, frankly, to upset people and colleagues and leaders. It also raises new dimensions of our accountability with frontline communities. We're mobilizing our power in new ways. We're taking on power in new ways. There is more risk, but there is also more potential impact. With the launch of All Our Might tonight, we are embarking on a journey, a new pathway, exciting, a little treacherous, a place we know we need to venture. Which makes me think of Tefillat HaDerech, the prayer that we traditionally say when we're setting out on a big journey, a big trip. We ask God to guide our footsteps and help us to reach our destination, l'chaim u'lesimcha u'leshalom, for life, for gladness, and for peace. And we also acknowledge that there will likely be foes along the way who may try to ambush us. And in this prayer, we ask for protection. God, may you send blessing to our work and grant us chen u'lechesed u'lerachamim. Grant us grace, kindness, and mercy. As we set out on this next stage of our journey together, as we embark with all our might, may the work of our hands and hearts be blessed. It's now my great pleasure to invite Bill McKibben to join me on the Zoom podium. In Pirkei Avot, in Wisdoms of the Fathers, the question is asked, who is wise? And the response is one who learns from all people. I've had the privilege of learning from many people about climate action, including many people I see tonight here. But tonight we have the chance to hear from someone that no matter how many times I hear speak, how many of his books I read, I always learn from. And I think it's safe to say that all people learn from. The writer, educator, and activist, Bill McKibben. Many of you may know Bill as a co-founder of the climate justice organization 350.org And he also recently launched a new venture, Third Act, working to mobilize experienced Americans, folks over 60, around climate action, racial equity, and protection of democracy. And we have the great privilege of having Bill on Daynu's advisory board. The All Our Might campaign is about using our power and moral voice to call on financial institutions to move their money, move it out of fossil fuels and into clean energy. This may be new to some of you, and I'm delighted to have Bill here to help educate us all. So welcome, Bill.
Well, what a pleasure to be with you, Rev. Jenny, as always.
My first question is intended to ground us in this moment in time. So as you know, Daynu's been working for months with many folks on this call to pass Build Back Better, which has the potential to be the first piece of meaningful legislation on the federal level ever, but as we know, is currently being renegotiated in the Senate. Now we're launching a brand new campaign focused on taking on fossil fuel companies, depriving them of the money they need to extract and transport and burn fuels. So the question is, why is it important that we take on oil, gas, and coal companies and the financial institutions that are funding them at the same time that we work to get this critical legislation across the finish line?
Well, exactly the right question. Look, climate change is the biggest thing that humans have ever done. It's the biggest challenge that we've ever faced as a species. And so it stands to reason that it's a battle that has to be fought on many fronts. At this late date, when we're behind the curve and the planet is heating fast, there are probably two levers big enough to pull that can make a significant difference. And one of them is marked politics and the other is marked money. Everybody's been pulling hard on this politics lever, and thank you to all the people who've been working on Build Back Better, from the kids at the Sunrise Movement who got it started through the Biden administration to everybody who's working hard. But it's an example of why putting all one's eggs in one basket would be a mistake. At the moment, we can't get it through. There's not a single vote out of the Republican side of the aisle in the Senate. And Senator Manchin, who's taken more money from the fossil fuel industry than any other person in Washington, not an easy contest to win, let me tell you, has blocked significant progress, gutted the legislation, and then held it up. And that's come at a huge cost. I mean, it meant that the Glasgow conference in the fall was pretty much a failure because Joe Biden arrived empty-handed without that legislation. So we got to pull this other lever too. We've got to go after the fossil fuel industry. And if we do, it will not only create significant progress in terms of the funding and financing of the extraction of coal and gas and oil, it will also weaken these guys politically so that they're no longer able to exercise that kind of dominance in Washington. So this is an important part of this task. It doesn't replace the fact that we need to change policy. What we're trying to do is create a world where reason stands a chance, where it doesn't always get overwhelmed by vested interest.
And speaking about policy change and tackling the climate crisis in a lot of different ways, you have a very particular personal story. I know that you spent years writing and teaching and helping to launch 350 and take on the powerful financial industries. What convinced you to commit yourself and your work to moving money away from fossil fuels? Why specifically that financial angle?
Well, in the largest sense, look, I wrote the first book about all this like 33 years ago, 34 years ago, something like that. And it took me too long to figure out that we needed to do more than write books, that we weren't having an argument, we were having a fight. And that fight has many facets, and I've gotten to work on lots of them, some of them electoral, some of them standing up to projects like the Keystone Pipeline. But a lot of the work has been around in recent years trying to take on the money behind all this. I wrote a piece for the New Yorker 3 or 4 years ago, and the somewhat long, but I think accurate title was Money is the oxygen on which the fires of global warming burn. Since the Paris Climate Accords were signed, for instance, the big banks, the 4 big US banks, have lent the fossil fuel industry $1 trillion. That's the oxygen that they need to build pipelines, make new frac wells, build LNG terminals, on and on and on and on. And if we can cut that pipeline, if we can staunch that flow of oxygen that fans these flames, then we've got a better chance at making the progress we need. Remember, we're lucky. We live in a world now where the scientists and engineers in the last decade have done their job so well that the price of solar power and wind power now makes it the cheapest energy on the planet. We could be moving fast in that direction if we could get over this complex of vested interest that stands in the way.
Thanks. Keep it in the ground. It's a phrase we hear. With any new campaign comes a lot of new ideas, a lot of new slogans. But what's the history and significance, particularly of this phrase? And I'm asking this because there are many campaigns and groups that use it as a rallying call, and there are many shoulders upon which we're standing in doing this work. Can you share a little bit about both the phrase and the campaigns and work behind it?
Oh, I think it's possible anyway that I may have helped coin the phrase some years ago. And because we needed to get across to people the idea that the fossil fuel industry has identified reserves that they've told shareholders and banks that they plan to dig up and burn that are something like 5 times the amount of carbon than any scientist says we could safely handle, i.e., their business plans equal the overheating of the planet in the most disastrous ways. So once we knew that, then it began to be a little more possible to kind of picture these guys as the rogue industries that they were and begin taking action. And people have been doing it on every front. We've seen the most extraordinary leadership in this keep it in the ground effort from frontline communities, the people who are most at risk, and especially from indigenous communities around the continent and around the world, who have often been on top of the deposits of coal and gas and oil that these guys have wanted to get at, or astride the pipeline routes that are needed to get them to market. So it's been really remarkable to watch that leadership and to watch it translate into this focus on things like banks. It was out of the fight over the Dakota Access Pipeline that we really first had that people first came up with the targeting of these big banks. It was a group called Mazaska Talks, which is a Lakota Sioux for money talks, that were the first to begin really taking up this challenge, and it's in their footsteps that we follow. So it's been a real and interesting and important saga.
And many of the most sort of courageous public actions have been led by frontline communities.
No question.
And I know that you yourself have been arrested dozens of times, protesting in front of banks, in front of fossil fuel projects themselves and government buildings. As part of the All Our Might campaign, we're going to ask people to demonstrate in front of banks and asset managers' offices. Some may even choose to risk arrest. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about what's the role in this work of public action, or what some people call nonviolent direct action.
Well, sure. Civil disobedience is a fascinating topic, It's really a kind of new technology in a way, invented in the 20th century from the margins by Gandhi, by Dr. King, by the suffragettes, by a million other people whose names we don't know, but who began to figure out that there were ways for the powerless to stand up to the powerful, that there was a certain kind of strange alchemy that came with the unearned suffering that civil disobedience represents. Now, it's only one tool in the activist toolkit. You do not want to use it all the time because, like any tool, it gets dull, literally and figuratively. But when there are times that we have to underline the moral urgency of something, it can be really powerful. And of course, this has deep, deep roots in, among other things, the political action tradition of American Judaism. Everybody's seen that famous picture of Rabbi Heschel walking shoulder to shoulder with Dr. King on the way to Selma. But I think people who aren't, I've been doing a lot of work looking back at the 60s as we do this work around Third Act and with older people like me, looking back on our first acts. People may forget that it was in 1964 that 17 rabbis traveled south at Dr. King's invitation to St. Augustine, Florida, where they engaged in civil disobedience, were arrested. And the manifesto that they put out was quite remarkable. We came to St. Augustine mainly because we could not stay away, they wrote. We came because we could not stand quietly. We have been vocal in our exhortation of others, but the idleness of our hands too often revealed an inner silence, silence at a time when silence has become the unpardonable sin of our time. We came in the hope that the God of all of us would accept our small involvement as partial atonement for the many things we wish we had done before and often. And I'll just say that in my experience, there's some truth to that sense that, there's some of the very few times when I felt like I was doing all that I could. Have been moments when I've been in jail. And it's not that everybody needs to go to jail. They don't. And in a rational world, and none of us would need to go to jail. It's crazy that people have to do civil disobedience to get our leaders to pay attention to clear scientific warnings, but that sometimes is the world in which we live. And so there are moments when we need to screw up our courage a little, and civil disobedience is not the end of the world. The end of the world is the end of the world. So that's why we do what we do.
Thank you, Bill. I have, 100 more questions for you and are just so grateful for you to share your time and your wisdom with us.
We're so grateful for the work that you're doing. And Dayenu is one of these great sparks that is giving all of us light and hope. So many thanks to everybody who's making it work. And it's great fun to get to be the Methodist caucus at Dayenu, I must say. So,
well, we appreciate your leadership and your moral voice, and your particularly apt way of communicating complicated ideas in ways that are so resonant and accessible. So thank you.
Thank you.
I want to hand it back to Sumner.
Thank you so much, Jenny and Bill, for helping us wrap our heads around the whole why fossil fuel finance is really important, why we're going to do this work. And now to segue into my work. One of the transitions that we're doing right now is we have done a Dayenu young adult climate organizing training called Taking Down Goliath. And that's part of our transition into our new campaign. I'd love to see if there are any one of our over 100 Taking Down Goliath participants on this call. If you want to put up an emoji or a reaction onto the screen, but so far I'd love to say hi to Adara, Aaron, Kayla, Rowan, Madeline, Ryan, Jeremy, and anyone else that I might have missed from our great group that we had a couple weeks ago. We focused on how fossil fuel companies are using denial and delay tactics to prevent meaningful climate action and environmental racism and the complete injustice of the climate action crisis. And also finally, public action planning, all within 3 great sessions. Currently, I'm Zooming you from a hotel room in Philadelphia because this weekend we are running a second version of Taking Down Goliath for college students here in Philadelphia to get them organizing on their campuses and locally and really learning about climate justice. So, one of my favorite things about the training is we ask, why are you so fired up about climate justice? What brings you to this work? Why are you here? Why have you taken time out of your busy lives to come be with us? And so many people talk about their personal experiences and their Jewish values and all of the things that are important and help make them them and why they come to this work. So, speaking of why you come to this work, I want to introduce Muriel McDonald, who was one of my co-facilitators of Taking Down Goliath, to share her story and share how we can use our Jewish values, our spirit, ruach, power, and all of our might to end the era of fossil fuels and build a clean, better energy future.
Thank you, Sumner. Such an honor to be training on Taking Down Goliath with you, and I'll see you in Philly soon. Hi, everyone. I'm Muriel, and I'm actually calling in from my parents' house in Virginia right now. But I grew up in Virginia, but after college, I moved to San Francisco. And I'd been living there for about 5 years when I experienced my first really bad fire season. Those of you in the Bay Area and in California in general probably remember it was 2018. And the Camp Fire, one of the deadliest fires in California history, sprang up, burning the town of Paradise to the ground and blanketing the northern half of California in smoke. And I had had a bad feeling about climate for a long time, basically as long as I can remember since I was a little kid, but I didn't really know what to do about it. I just felt this growing horror that none of the people in power seemed to be doing anything about it. And none of the institutions I was a part of seemed to be doing anything about it. And I couldn't understand why everyone else's hair wasn't on fire about this. And I can tell you that I was not very fun to be around at parties. A lot of anguished conversations in the kitchen and things like that. But experiencing the smoke from the campfire was different. And it was different because it was worse. The smoke got so bad in the Bay Area that I decided to flee down to my grandmother's house a few hours south in San Luis Obispo, which was at that point the only part of the state that wasn't covered in smoke. And a friend picked me up in their junky old car. And when we stopped for gas, we saw a headline that over 80 people were missing from the fire sweeping through the town of Paradise. And halfway to my grandma's house, my friend's car broke down. So we tightened our N95 masks and took the bus. And it felt utterly apocalyptic. And it was the most helpless that I have ever felt in the face of the climate crisis. And because of that, it was also a turning point. Because even in this place of despair, I felt, and I still feel so keenly, how beautiful this earth is and how unbelievably complex the cycles of the planet are, the history and the evolution of so many species, and how sacred our communities are, our oral histories, our traditions, our songs. And I know these things are worth saving, even when the odds feel very long indeed. So at my grandmother's house, I found a book about the Highlander Folk School and started reading about how this school in Tennessee used organizing to help power the early labor organizing in the 1930s and 40s, and then to midwife the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. And I thought, if organizing nonviolent direct action can win victories in the face of institutional racism, surely we can use it to organize to address the climate crisis. And of course, plenty of people, including people on this call, were already doing that. And the next day, I was on Facebook doom scrolling, and I saw a video of several dozen young people my age, sitting in at Nancy Pelosi's office, demanding that she prioritize climate. They were sitting in, that same tactic that I was reading about that people used in the civil rights movement. And that was it for me. And since that day, I've been fighting and organizing to address the climate crisis. And most specifically, pass massive federal policy, because I know that we need policy change to address something this big and systemic. And our Jewish communities have been rising to the occasion too. Many of you organized to turn out climate concerned voters in key states with Chutzpah 2020. Maybe use those reactions at the bottom of your screen. Give me like a, party react or a heart react or a thumbs up if you were part of Chutzpah 2020. I know some of you were. And my friends and I actually knocked doors in full PPE in the height of the pandemic in Arizona and then in Georgia, holding onto the hope that we could win just enough power, just enough margin in the Senate that we could pass a just green recovery bill that would be the first major climate legislation in US history. And we hoped become the first planks of a Green New Deal, kicking off a decade of serious climate action that finally treats the crisis with the seriousness that it demands. And it was a huge honor to stand alongside and support so many of you as you organized here the call actions around the high holidays this past fall, calling on our senators to pass the Build Back Better Act, which could be the first meaningful climate legislation to ever pass into law. Can I see if you have those reactions, if you were at a Hear the Call action or helped organize a Hear the Call action? I recognize so many of you from organizing that. Yeah, I'm seeing the hearts. Randy and Micah and Laura and Diane and Sandy and Shannon. So many of you were there. And I know that many of you were organizing something like this for the first time, that it was outside of your comfort zone, that it was something new to your communities. I'd say a highlight for me was getting to support my dad, Lawrence McDonald, and my home congregation of Temple Road Shalom to take action in Virginia outside of Senator Warner's office. And I'm so proud of all of you. And it has gotten us that much closer to winning the climate action that we need. But as you know, we haven't gotten the investments that we need yet. And the bill hasn't passed. And to be totally honest, it's really heartbreaking. And we're still hoping that some version of Build Back Better passes, and we're still fighting for it too. And we're going to keep doing that. But to be honest, it won't be enough to tackle the climate crisis. We need it. It's a start, and it won't be enough. And it has become really, really clear that even if something passes, the fossil fuel industry has way too much power. And that mostly comes in the form of way too much money. It's a dying industry, but it's not dying fast enough. And it's become this race against time to move beyond fossil fuels before they destroy us. In June, I had the privilege of traveling with a delegation of Dayenu organizers to Anishinaabe territory, known to some as Northern Minnesota, to support Indigenous organizers and elders to fight to stop Line 3, a dirty tar sands pipeline cutting across the sacred wild rice fields of the Anishinaabe against their will. In Minnesota, the pipeline company had funded the local sheriff's department, and throughout last summer, peaceful Indigenous water protectors who were often engaged in prayer were attacked with dogs, with sound cannons, and even a dangerously low-flying helicopter. At frontline fights such as these, you can see the dark and ugly side of the fossil fuel industry firsthand. And of course, it's the same bad guys. It's the same corporations, and it's the same dirty fossil fuel money paying for a violent sheriff and dogs in Minnesota, funding senators like Joe Manchin, who delay and delay and delay on climate action until it is too late. I know there are people on this call tonight who are younger than I am, who, like me, are fighting for ourselves right now, for climate impacts that will transpire within our lifetimes. And there are people much older than me on this call who may be fighting mostly for future generations, for children, grandchildren, for continuity of our communities. As Jews, we know how important it is to fight for ourselves and for future generations. And that will always be something worth fighting for. So here we are together, launching All Our Might, a Jewish campaign to end the era of fossil fuels and build a clean energy future. Why All Our Might? Well, in the Ve'ahavta part of the Shema, we are told to love God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, and with all of our might. Over the past year, we've brought all of our heart and soul to confront the climate crisis. We've made thousands of calls to policymakers, showed up at their offices, sounded shofarot in the streets, stood shoulder to shoulder with communities on the front lines of the climate crisis, and joined the broader climate movement to mobilize in Washington, D.C. I'm still hopeful that the historic investments that are part of Build Back Better will pass. But even a remarkable $500 billion of investments in clean energy cannot prevent the most harmful impacts of climate change. We will need to do much more to cut emissions. And Congress has spent decades debating emissions cuts, only to be thwarted by the money and power of the fossil fuel industry at every turn, who have for decades now delayed on climate action just to make a profit. We saw it with Build Back Better, as an Exxon executive was caught on tape bragging about how he had senators like Joe Manchin on speed dial. And that's why over the past few years, communities across the country, many led by Black, Brown, and Indigenous leaders, have taken matters into their own hands, passing local and state laws and taking direct action to prevent the drilling, mining, transporting, and refining of fossil fuels. A truly David and Goliath story. But targeting fossil fuel companies directly is really difficult. And this powerful industry has deep pockets and a stranglehold on our political process and almost no incentive to change its core business model, which is extraction. So we need to bring all the people and power of the American Jewish community to bear. We need to bring all of our might. As Bill and Jenny talked about earlier, we have another powerful way to stop the drilling, mining, and burning. And that is to cut off the fossil fuel industry's financial lifeline. And those companies won't be able to burn up our planet. Since the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015, the world's top 60 global banks, including JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, Citigroup, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo, have invested $3.8 trillion into fossil fuels. And the top 3 asset managers, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, have invested more than $1 trillion. Just a handful of firms keep the fossil fuel industry afloat. But unlike fossil fuel companies, investors can be forces for good and drivers of a clean energy economy if they decide to invest in a just and livable future instead of a polluting past. Even as many top Wall Street firms have made commitments to cutting emissions to zero by 2050, their books show that even though they're ramping up clean energy investments in a big way, they are not yet taking meaningful action to end the financing of fossil fuels. So the All Our Might campaign has 3 strategies working together to accelerate the end of the fossil fuel era and build a clean energy future. Y'all ready? Can I get like some wiggly clap fingers in the chat? Okay, cool. You're still with me? Good. So here's our 3 strategies. First, we're going to mobilize Jews, Jewish communities, and Jewish institutions to pressure major banks, asset managers, and investors to leave behind fossil fuels and invest in a clean energy future, including public pressure campaigns on key banks and investment managers such as Vanguard, BlackRock, JP Morgan Chase, and Citigroup. We're coming for them. These top investors own nearly a quarter of publicly traded fossil fuel companies and can make or break the industry. This is our biggest opportunity for impact, moving the tens of trillions of dollars the world's largest asset managers and top banks have invested in fossil fuels. Second, we're going to partner with Jewish institutions, which taken together hold nearly $100 billion in assets, to help their investment strategies better reflect our shared Jewish values. Dayenu will support and connect Jewish institutions to resources and tools so that they can leave fossil fuels behind and reinvest their assets in clean energy and sustainable solutions. And we are confident that many Jewish institutions will join the growing trend of more than 1,500 institutions, such as Harvard University and New York State Common Pension Fund, in moving away from fossil fuels in ways that protect our shared values and our responsible investing strategies. Together, we can align our communal investments to reflect Jewish values like living L'dor V'dor, sustaining the Jewish people from generation to generation, Bal Tashchit, the prohibition against destruction, Shomrei Adamah, protecting creation, and Terdof Tzedek, pursuing justice. If you are connected to a Jewish communal institution that is interested in aligning its investments with Jewish values and climate action, we'll have tools and resources to support you. And third, at key strategic moments, we will confront the fossil fuel industry through political advocacy and direct action, shoulder to shoulder with frontline communities as they challenge the drilling, mining, and transportation of coal, oil, and gas. The American Jewish community is poised to play an important role in keeping fossil fuels in the ground, recognizing our responsibility to current and future generations, and bringing our spirit, people, and power to the broader movement. If we're successful in the coming months and years, we will have helped to keep fossil fuels in the ground, cut emissions, and make real measurable impacts on climate change. Can I get some wiggly fingers again if that feels good to you, like something you want to do? Yeah. The first major effort in the All Our Might campaign will be organizing Passover actions outside of bank branches and asset managers' offices across the country. Rooted in the stories and symbols of Passover, we will deliver a message to those financial institutions that they must live up to their commitments to leave the polluting past and reach a just and livable future. The month of April is an especially important moment for action because in addition to it being Passover, many financial institutions will be preparing for their shareholder meetings, a key time that we want to make our voices heard. So we invite you, all 290 of you, to help organize or attend an All Our Might Passover action outside of a bank branch or asset manager's office near you in the weeks around Passover. It's okay if you've never done anything like this before. If you're nervous about getting out there publicly or standing in front of a bank, we have toolkits, trainings, and we are going to be here to support you every step of the way. The first step is to join an action planning call on Wednesday night, March 2nd, where you'll learn more about these Passover actions and how you can get involved. And I hope you'll join us. I'll close with a final reflection on what brings me to this work and what I see reflected back in this campaign and in the Dayenu community and all of you here tonight. Like the Ve'ahavta, All Our Might is rooted in love. Love for our planet, love for our communities, and love for generations to come. So I'm asking you to join me and join us in this crucial new effort. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Muriel, for sharing your story with us and laying out the campaign so beautifully, perfectly. It was great. So what's next? We want to hear how you're planning on participating in the campaign and bringing all of your might to this campaign. There'll be another poll that's going to pop up on your screen asking you how you're planning to join us. Feel free to pick more than one option. It's going to be multiple choice. So boom, there it is. Now we do our people are choosing the pole dance. Wow, we're getting some great results so far. Thank you so much. As Smash Mouth says, and they don't stop coming, and they don't stop coming, and they don't stop coming. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll right now and show you the results, but don't worry, you can keep all of this in the back of your mind. So these are our results. 55% of you, that is over half, said that you are going to join or organize an action outside of a bank or a financial institution this Passover. Yes, 45% of you are going to work with your Jewish organization or congregation to move your money out of fossil fuel investments and into clean energy. That is so important. 33% of you want to join as an ally with frontline communities impacted by the climate crisis. And 38% of you aren't sure yet, but you want to be involved. And that is totally, perfectly fine and okay. Well, we have ambitious plans, as you can tell, but we're only going to succeed in ending the era of fossil fuels and building a just, clean energy future by bringing all of our heart, all of our soul, and all of our might. As Muriel shared, our first major campaign moment is this April around Passover. And I'm so excited that all of you, over half, are planning to join these events. With your leadership and with Dianu's support, we're hoping to organize more than 20 actions at bank branches and asset managers' offices around the country, showing the power and the commitment of the Jewish community to end the era of fossil fuels. So if you really want to be in this, join us along with our friends and our allies at the Jewish Youth Climate Movement and the Exodus Alliance on Wednesday evening, March 2nd, for a community action planning call to learn more, get the action toolkit, and get planning. We're going to drop the link to the RSVP in the chat and make sure that you bring a friend along too. We're going to close with a performance from singer, songwriter, and song leader Chava Muriel. Her song Stand Up is exactly the song that we need to launch this campaign with love, spirit, and bold action. Chava.
Thank you so much. I'm sure I speak for so many here who are inspired and energized and grateful for the opportunity to live the Torah of service and stewardship of our planet. Le'odah ulshomra. We stand on the earth, so we better stand for her together. We stand on the earth, so we better stand for her together. Stand up for Mother, stand up for each other. Stand up for Mother, stand up for each other. We were put in this paradise, it's our job to guard her life. We were put in this paradise, it's our job to guard her life. Stand up for Mother, stand up for each other. Stand up for Mother, stand up for each other. Whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, oh, 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 oh. Whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, oh, 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 oh. Le'odah ulshomra. Yeah, stand up for Mother, stand up for each other. Stand up for Mother, stand up for each other. Whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, oh, 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 oh. Thank
That was
you.
beautiful, Chava. Thank you so much. And thank you all again, all 260 of you for joining us tonight. We're going to drop the link to sign up for the March 2nd Action Planning Call one more time in the chat. Don't miss it. Tell all your friends, make sure you come. And then we're going to turn the chat back on for you to say goodbye and wish each other Lila Tov as we close out the program. So I'm so excited to see you in 2 weeks at our action planning call. Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much for coming.
Ledor, Vador, ancestors sing from the waters. Ledor, Vador, children shout from the trees. Generations to come demand that we act now to heal the earth, for all to thrive under the sun. Ledor, Vador, ancestors share their wisdom. Ledor, Vador, children take the lead. Generations to come demand that we act now to heal the earth, for all to thrive under the sun. Ledor, Vador, Vador. Ledor, Vador, Vador. Ledor, Vador, ancestors call for justice. Ledor, Vador, children chant for peace. Generations to come demand that we act now to heal the earth, for all to thrive under the sun. Ay, 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 la, 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 ay, 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 la, 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 ay, 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 la, 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 to heal the earth.